Welcome everybody to Victor's Forbidden Desire. Please do enjoy this next video.
The knife presses cold against Jasper's ribs as the stranger slams him against the barn wall. Where are the Bennett brothers hiding? The attacker snarls. I know what you are, all three of you. Disgusting perverts playing house. Jasper's heart pounds. Someone knows. A gunshot cracks through the night. The stranger falls, blood spreading across his shoulder. Rourke stands in the doorway, revolver smoking, Silas beside him. The wounded man scrambles backward. You'll hang for this, but the real question is not who fired the shot. It is how their secret got out, and how many others are coming for them. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Jasper Cole knew the moment he heard both sets of boots on the barn floor that his life was about to change forever. The heavy footfalls echoed through the dim space where dust motes danced in shafts of late afternoon light, and his hands froze on the leather he had been mending. He did not need to turn around to know who stood behind him. The air itself shifted when Rourke and Silas Bennett entered a room, as if the world recognized men who bent it to their will rather than the other way around. The older brother Rourke spoke first, his voice like whiskey poured over gravel. "We need to have a conversation, Jasper." The younger brother Silas added nothing, but Jasper could feel those pale eyes burning into his back, stripping away every defense he had carefully constructed over the past 6 months of working on the Bennett ranch. Jasper's throat went dry. He set down the bridle with hands that wanted to tremble but did not dare, not yet, and slowly turned to face the two men who had occupied far too many of his restless nights. Rourke leaned against the barn door with his arms crossed over a chest that strained against his work shirt. Dark hair fallen across a face carved from frontier stone. Silas stood closer, too close, near enough that Jasper could smell leather and sage and something deeper that made his pulse quicken, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "What conversation would that be, sir?" Jasper managed, hating how his voice barely rose above a whisper. Rourke pushed off from the door and moved forward with the lazy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. "About why you have been avoiding us for 3 days straight. About why you nearly jumped out of your skin when Silas asked you to help with the new stallion yesterday. About why you have been sleeping in the barn instead of the bunkhouse where you belong." Each word landed like a brand, and Jasper felt heat crawl up his neck. "I have not been avoiding anyone. I have been working. Just like you pay me to do." Silas made a sound low in his throat that might have been amusement or something far more dangerous. His hand came up to grip Jasper's chin, forcing their eyes to meet, and the touch sent lightning racing down Jasper's spine. "Lying does not suit you, boy. Your face gives away every thought in that pretty head." Jasper tried to jerk away, but Silas held firm, thumb pressing just hard enough against his jaw to make him gasp. The barn suddenly felt too small, too hot, the walls closing in as Rourke moved to stand at Jasper's other side. They surrounded him like wolves circling prey, and God help him, part of Jasper wanted nothing more than to surrender. "We know what you saw 3 nights ago," Rourke said quietly, and the words turned Jasper's blood to ice, then fire, then ice again. "We know you were in the hayloft when we thought the barn was empty. We know you watched." Shame and desire warred in Jasper's chest until he could not breathe properly. He had told himself it was an accident, that he had only climbed up to check on a loose board and happened to see the Bennett brothers in the stall below, happened to see Rourke press Silas against the wooden wall with a hunger that made Jasper's entire body ache with want he had no right to feel. He had watched frozen and horrified and desperately aroused as the brothers came together with a passion that spoke of years of hidden need, of stolen moments in the darkness where no one could judge them. And when Silas had looked up suddenly, eyes scanning the shadows as if he sensed they were not alone, Jasper had fled like a thief in the night. "I did not mean to intrude," Jasper whispered. "I should have left sooner. I am sorry." Silas released his chin, only to trail fingers down the side of Jasper's throat, following the frantic pulse that betrayed every lie. "Sorry for watching, or sorry you got caught?" "Both," Jasper breathed, then shuddered when Rourke's hand came to rest on his lower back, warm and possessive even through the thin fabric of his shirt. "Neither," Rourke corrected, voice dropping to something that vibrated through Jasper's bones. "You're sorry because you think what you felt was wrong. You're sorry because you have spent your whole life being told that wanting what you want makes you broken." Tears pricked at Jasper's eyes because the words cut too close to truth. He was 22 years old and had known since he was 14 that he would never want what other men wanted. Never court a girl or build a family or live the life his father had planned before consumption took him. He had learned to hide it, to bury the hunger so deep that most days he could pretend it did not exist. But then he had come to work for the Bennett brothers, and every day became an exercise in restraint that left him raw and aching. "Look at me," Silas commanded, and Jasper obeyed because he had no strength left to do otherwise. The younger Bennett brother was beautiful in a way that hurt, all sharp cheekbones and full lips and eyes the color of storm clouds before the rain. "We are not going to punish you for seeing what you saw. We are not going to shame you or turn you out, but we are also not going to pretend that nothing has changed." Jasper's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break free from his chest. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," Rourke said simply, and the word hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. "We have watched you for months, Jasper. Watched you work yourself half to death trying to prove your worth. Watched you pull away every time we got too close, every time our fingers brushed or our eyes held a moment too long. We thought maybe we were imagining it, that we were seeing what we wanted to see. But 3 nights ago, when you watched us with that look in your eyes, we knew." "Knew what?" Jasper demanded, though part of him already understood and was terrified of the answer. Silas leaned in until their foreheads nearly touched, until Jasper could feel the heat of him, like standing too close to a fire. "That you want this too, that you ache the same way we ache, that you lie awake at night thinking about things you have been taught are sinful and wrong, but feel more right than anything else in your life." The words broke something open inside Jasper, something he had kept locked away for so long that he had almost forgotten it existed. A sob caught in his throat, and before he could stop himself, before he could think about consequences or propriety or the 100 reasons this was impossible, he surged forward and pressed his mouth to Silas's in a kiss born of desperation and years of denial. Silas responded immediately, one hand fisting in Jasper's hair, while the other gripped his hip hard enough to bruise, and the kiss was nothing like Jasper had imagined in his secret fantasies. It was rougher, more demanding, all teeth and tongue and the taste of coffee and want. Then Rourke was there too, spinning Jasper around so that Silas pressed against his back, while Rourke claimed his mouth with a hunger that made the world tilt sideways. Jasper's hands came up to clutch at Rourke's shoulders because his legs had gone weak, and he felt Silas's lips on his neck, teeth scraping sensitive skin in a way that tore a sound from Jasper's throat he had never made before. They played him like an instrument, these brothers who knew each other's rhythms and read each other's desires without words, and Jasper was helpless against the onslaught of sensation. When Rourke finally pulled back, they were all breathing hard, and Jasper's lips felt swollen and well used. "This is your choice," Rourke said, though his hands remained on Jasper's waist as if he could not quite let go. "We will not force you into anything. But if you say yes, if you choose to walk this path with us, there will be no going back. You will belong to us the same way we belong to each other." Jasper looked between them, these two men who had somehow seen past every wall he had built, who offered him something he had never dared to dream possible. The practical part of his mind screamed warnings about discovery and consequences, about the very real danger of being caught in a territory where men like them were not tolerated. But the part of him that had been starving for so long, that had withered under the weight of loneliness and shame, that part reached out with both hands and refused to let go. "Yes," he whispered, and the word sealed his fate. Rourke's eyes darkened with something primal, and Silas made a sound of pure satisfaction against Jasper's ear. "Then we should take this somewhere more private," Rourke said. "Somewhere we will not be interrupted." He took Jasper's hand and led him toward the back of the barn, where a small tack room offered the only real privacy on the entire ranch. Silas followed, and the three of them crowded into the space that smelled of leather oil and hay. Rourke shut the door, and for a moment they simply stood there, breathing in sync, the weight of what they were about to do hanging heavy and electric. Jasper's hands shook as he reached for the buttons of his shirt, but Silas caught his wrists. "Not yet. First, we need you to understand what this means." Jasper swallowed hard. "I understand that I want this more than I have wanted anything in my life." "That is not what I mean," Silas said, voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Out there, beyond these walls, you work for us. You take orders and earn your wages, and no one questions the arrangement. But in here, in moments like this, we are equals. What we do together is because we all want it, because it feeds something in each of us that nothing else can touch. Do you understand?" Jasper nodded slowly, some of the fear easing as he recognized the care beneath Silas's intensity. The younger brother might be fierce, but he was not cruel, and neither was Rourke despite his commanding presence. They were offering him not just their bodies, but their trust, and that meant more than all the words in the world. "Then come here," Rourke said, settling himself on the old bench that ran along one wall and pulling Jasper down to straddle his lap. Jasper went willingly, his thighs bracketing Rourke's hips, and when the older brother's hand slid under his shirt to trace the ladder of his ribs, Jasper's head fell back with a gasp. Silas moved behind him again, this time pulling Jasper's shirt up and over his head so that he sat bare-chested in the dim light. 4 hands explored his skin, learning the plains and hollows, and everywhere they touched felt like fire spreading through dry grass. Jasper had touched himself in the darkness of night, had imagined moments like this with a shame that made him sick, but nothing in his fantasies compared to the reality of being held between these two men who knew exactly how to take him apart. Rourke's mouth found his collarbone, teeth grazing the delicate skin there, while Silas worked at the fastenings of Jasper's trousers with steady fingers. The vulnerability of being exposed while they remained fully clothed should have frightened him, but instead it made him feel cherished, like something precious they were unwrapping with care. When Silas's hand finally wrapped around him, Jasper cried out and buried his face against Rourke's shoulder. The sensation was overwhelming, too much and not enough all at once, and his hips jerked forward, seeking more friction, more contact, more everything. "Easy," Rourke murmured against his ear. "We have time, all the time you need." But time felt like an illusion as they worked him over with practiced touches, as Silas stroked him with a rhythm that had Jasper seeing stars, while Rourke held him steady and whispered encouragement that made Jasper's heart ache. He had never been with anyone before, had never allowed himself even this much, and the newness of it combined with years of pent-up need meant he was already trembling on the edge of something vast. "I cannot," he gasped. "It is too much. I'm going to—" "Let go," Silas commanded. "Give us everything." And Jasper did, surrendering to the wave that crashed over him with a force that stole his breath and his sense and everything except the feeling of being held safe between two people who would catch him when he fell. He shook apart in their arms, sounds torn from his throat that he had never made before, and through it all, and they gentled him with touches and soft words until he collapsed boneless against Rourke's chest. For a long moment, no one moved. Jasper's heart gradually slowed and awareness crept back in, along with a flush of embarrassment at how quickly he had come undone. But when he tried to pull away, to apologize for his inexperience, Rourke simply tightened his arms. "Do not," the older brother said firmly. "Do not apologize for being responsive. Do not apologize for letting us see you like this. It was perfect." Jasper lifted his head to find both brothers watching him with expressions that made his chest tight. There was desire there, yes, clear and unmistakable, but also something softer that he was afraid to name. "What about you?" he asked, voice still rough. "What about us?" Silas questioned with a small smile. "You did not—" Jasper gestured vaguely, unable to form the words. "We have time for that," Rourke assured him. "Tonight was about you, about making sure you understood what we are offering." Jasper's eyes burned with emotions he could not sort through. No one had ever put his needs first, had ever cared whether he understood or consented or felt safe. The Bennett brothers were dangerous in ways he had not anticipated, not because they might hurt him, but because they might make him hope for things that could never last. As if reading his thoughts, Silas cupped his face with both hands. "Whatever you are thinking, stop. We are not playing games with you, Jasper. This is not some temporary arrangement that ends when we grow bored. Rourke and I have been alone a long time, longer than you know, and we have learned to recognize something real when we find it. You are real, this is real, and we will protect it no matter what it costs." The conviction in his voice made Jasper believe, made him want to believe, and he found himself nodding, even as tears slipped free to track down his cheeks. Silas wiped them away with gentle thumbs and pressed a kiss to Jasper's forehead that felt like a benediction. They helped him dress again, their touches now tender rather than inciting, and when they finally emerged from the tack room, the sun had set and stars were beginning to prick the darkening sky. Jasper's legs still felt unsteady, but his heart felt fuller than it had in years, as if something broken had been carefully pieced back together. "You will sleep in the main house tonight," Rourke said, and it was not a request. "We have a spare room where you will be comfortable and safe." Jasper wanted to argue, to point out that sleeping under their roof would raise questions among the other ranch hands, but the thought of returning to his lonely cot in the barn made his throat close. He nodded and let Rourke guide him across the yard with a hand at the small of his back. The house was larger than Jasper had expected, built solid from good timber, with real glass in the windows and floors that did not creak. Rourke led him upstairs to a room that was simple but clean, with a real bed and blankets that smelled of lavender. "This was my mother's room," Rourke said quietly. "She died when I was 12 and Silas was 8. Our father followed her 2 years later. It has sat empty ever since. But I think she would have liked knowing it was being used again." The trust implicit in those words, the vulnerability of sharing something so personal, made Jasper's chest ache. He reached out and caught Rourke's hand, squeezing gently. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Rourke's expression softened in the lamplight. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we will talk about how this works, about what changes and what stays the same. But tonight, just sleep knowing you are exactly where you belong." He left before Jasper could respond, closing the door with a soft click. Jasper stood in the center of the room for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened, trying to believe this was real and not some fever dream his lonely mind had conjured. Finally, he stripped down to his underclothes and climbed between sheets softer than anything he had ever felt. And despite his racing thoughts, sleep claimed him almost immediately. He dreamed of work-roughened hands and whispered promises, of a future that might actually hold more than just survival. When he woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs, Jasper felt the unfamiliar sensation of hope unfurling in his chest. He dressed quickly and made his way to the kitchen where he found both brothers already awake. Rourke stood at the stove, cooking eggs, while Silas sat at the table with a cup in his hands, and the domestic scene made something warm settle in Jasper's stomach. "Morning," Silas said, with a slow smile that promised things Jasper's body immediately responded to despite his exhaustion. Jasper ducked his head to hide his flush. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" Rourke asked, sliding a plate of food in front of him. "Better than I have in months," Jasper admitted, and it was the truth. The nightmares that usually plagued him had stayed away, kept at bay by the knowledge that he was not alone. They ate in comfortable silence, and Jasper marveled at how natural it felt to sit at their table, to share this morning ritual, as if he belonged there. When the meal was finished, Rourke pushed his chair back and fixed Jasper with a serious look. "We need to establish some ground rules. Out there, when other people are around, nothing changes. You are still our employee. We are still your employers. There can be no visible difference in how we interact." Jasper understood immediately. Discovery would mean ruin for all of them, possibly death if the wrong people found out. "I know how to be careful." "Good," Silas said, "because we are not planning to hide what we are forever, but we need time to figure out how to protect ourselves and you." "In here, though," Rourke continued, gesturing to encompass the house, "when it is just the three of us, you are ours and we are yours, equal in all the ways that matter." Jasper's throat went tight. "What if someone notices that I am staying in the house?" "They will assume you are doing extra work for extra pay," Silas said. "Bookkeeping or inventory or some other tedious task we do not want to handle ourselves. Ranch hands gossip, but they do not ask questions that might threaten their own positions." It made sense, and Jasper found himself nodding. "What about the other aspects of this arrangement?" Rourke and Silas exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "We go at your pace," Rourke said firmly. "Last night was intense, and we do not want to overwhelm you. This is new territory for all of us in some ways." "What do you mean?" Jasper asked. Silas leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Rourke and I have been together since we were young, since before we fully understood what it meant. We have learned each other's bodies and desires over years, but adding a third person, especially someone as inexperienced as you, changes the dynamic. We have to relearn how to navigate intimacy." The honesty made Jasper feel less vulnerable in his own lack of knowledge. "So we figure it out together?" "Exactly," Rourke confirmed. "And if at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to stop, you say so. No judgment, no consequences, just honesty." Jasper believed them, and that belief was terrifying in its own way because it meant he had something real to lose. But as he looked at the two men who had somehow seen him when he thought he was invisible, who had offered him not just physical pleasure, but genuine care, he knew he would rather risk the loss than spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both surreal and perfectly natural. During daylight hours, Jasper worked the ranch alongside the other hands, tending horses and mending fences and doing all the backbreaking labor that came with frontier life. Rourke and Silas treated him no differently than anyone else. Their commands crisp and professional, their praise sparing but genuine. But when the sun set and the ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse for cards and whiskey, Jasper made his way to the main house where the brothers waited. Some evenings they simply sat together in the parlor, Rourke reading while Silas sketched and Jasper mended tack or polished leather. The quiet companionship filled something in Jasper he had not known was empty. The simple pleasure of existing in the same space as people who wanted him there. Other nights were less innocent, explorations of touch and taste that left Jasper breathless and aching in the best possible way. The brothers were patient teachers, guiding him through the mechanics of pleasure while also encouraging him to voice his own desires. It was harder than Jasper expected, this business of asking for what he wanted. But Rourke and Silas never let him hide behind shame or embarrassment. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Jasper woke in the middle of the night from a nightmare that left him shaking and sick. He had dreamed of his father discovering him, of the beatings and the screaming and being cast out with nowhere to go. It was an old fear, one that had haunted him since childhood, but it felt more immediate now that he had something to lose. He slipped from bed and padded barefoot down the hallway, not sure where he was going until he found himself outside Rourke and Silas's closed door. Before he could talk himself out of it, he knocked softly. The door opened almost immediately to reveal Silas in nothing but sleep trousers, hair mussed, and eyes alert. "Jasper, what is wrong?" Jasper's voice failed him. He stood there trembling like a fool until Silas simply reached out and pulled him inside. Rourke sat up in the large bed, concern creasing his features. "Jasper?" "Bad dream," Jasper managed. "I am sorry. I should not have bothered you." "You are never a bother," Rourke said firmly. "Come here." Jasper went, crawling into the bed between them like he belonged there. And when they wrapped around him from both sides, the nightmare's grip finally loosened. Silas pressed a kiss to his temple while Rourke's hand traced soothing patterns on his back, and gradually Jasper's breathing evened out. "Do you want to talk about it?" Rourke asked quietly. "My father," Jasper whispered. "He used to say that men like me were abominations, that we deserved whatever suffering came our way. I have not thought about him in years, but tonight it all came back." Silas's arms tightened around him. "Your father was wrong. There is nothing broken or sinful about you. You are brave and kind, and you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." The words should have sounded hollow, the kind of empty reassurance people gave without meaning, but Silas spoke with such fierce conviction that Jasper had to believe him. And even if he did not fully believe, lying between two men who clearly saw value in him made the doubt easier to bear. "Thank you," he murmured, already feeling sleep pull at him again, "for letting me be here." "You never have to thank us for this," Rourke said. "This is where you belong." When Jasper woke again, it was to early morning light and the realization that he was still tangled between Rourke and Silas, their bodies warm and solid against his. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt completely safe. The brothers stirred as he shifted, and Silas made a satisfied sound low in his throat. "Good morning," the younger brother rumbled, voice still rough with sleep. Jasper turned to face him and found storm-gray eyes watching him with unmistakable heat. "Morning. Did you sleep better?" Rourke asked from behind, his breath warm against Jasper's neck. "Much better," Jasper confirmed, then gasped when Silas's hand slid down his stomach to rest just above the waistband of his sleep pants. "We have time before we need to be up," Silas said, the words more question than statement. Jasper's heart rate picked up, but he nodded, given permission he wanted desperately to give. Silas's hand moved lower, while Rourke's mouth found the sensitive spot behind Jasper's ear, and within moments, Jasper was lost to sensation. They moved together with an ease born of growing familiarity, and when Jasper finally came apart, it was with both their names on his lips. Afterward, they lay in a tangle of limbs in satisfied exhaustion, and Jasper thought that this simple intimacy of being held and wanted, might be the most precious gift anyone had ever given him. The morning routine eventually demanded their attention, and they dressed with the easy efficiency of people comfortable in each other's space. Over breakfast, Rourke mentioned that they would be driving a herd to market in a few weeks, which meant several days on the trail. "You will come with us," he said to Jasper. "We need experienced hands, and you have proven yourself capable." Jasper's chest warmed at the praise even as nervousness fluttered in his stomach. He had never been on a cattle drive before, had only worked horses and general ranch maintenance. But the idea of days away from the ranch, away from prying eyes, made something hopeful bloom. The weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Jasper worked harder than ever, determined to prove Rourke's faith in him was justified, and at night he fell into bed exhausted but content. The nightmares came less frequently now, kept at bay by the knowledge that he was not alone, that if they returned he could seek comfort in strong arms and steady heartbeats. Finally the day came to move the herd. They set out at dawn with 6 other ranch hands, the cattle lowing and restless as they were driven onto the trail. Jasper rode near the middle of the group, keeping the stragglers moving, while Rourke led from the front, and Silas ranged up and down the line, troubleshooting problems. It was hard, dusty work that left Jasper's muscles screaming and his throat parched. But there was a satisfaction in it too, in being part of something larger than himself. Each night they made camp under the stars, the men sitting around the fire sharing stories and passing a bottle of whiskey. Jasper found himself relaxing into the camaraderie, laughing at crude jokes and offering his own observations. Rourke and Silas sat across from him, their expressions carefully neutral. But Jasper caught the approval in their eyes when he handled himself well. On the third night, after the other hands had rolled into their bedrolls, Jasper slipped away from camp on the pretext of checking the horses. He had not been alone with the brothers since they left the ranch, and the separation was starting to wear on him in ways he had not expected. He found them standing together near where the horses were picketed, and when they saw him approach, something heated passed between all 3 of them. "We should not," Rourke said, but his eyes said otherwise. The other men could wake. "They are exhausted," Silas countered, "and we will be quick." He reached for Jasper, pulling him into the shadows where the firelight did not reach, and Jasper went willingly. This was reckless and dangerous and everything they had agreed not to do, but Jasper could not bring himself to care when Silas's mouth found his, and Rourke's hands gripped his hips. They kept quiet out of necessity, swallowing each other's sounds, and the urgency of it made everything more intense. Jasper's head spun with the risk and the pleasure, until he could not tell them apart, and when release finally claimed him, it was with teeth marks on his shoulder to muffle his cry. Afterward they stood together breathing hard, and Jasper knew they should return to camp before someone noticed their absence. But for just a moment longer he let himself lean into their warmth, let himself pretend that this was sustainable, that they could keep stealing these moments without consequence. Tomorrow they would reach the market town where the herd would be sold. Tomorrow they would have to navigate crowds and scrutiny and all the dangers that came with civilization. But tonight, under a blanket of stars with the only 2 people who had ever truly seen him, Jasper let himself simply be. The journey continued with its challenges and victories, and through it all, Jasper felt himself changing, becoming someone stronger and more certain. The ranch hand who had been afraid of his own shadow was transforming into a man who knew what he wanted and was learning to reach for it. The market town appeared on the horizon 2 days later, a sprawl of wooden buildings and dusty streets. Jasper felt his stomach tighten as they drove the herd through the main thoroughfare toward the stock pens, aware of eyes watching from porches and doorways. Here there would be no privacy, no stolen moments. Here they would have to be nothing more than employer and employee. They penned the cattle and began negotiation with buyers. Jasper stayed busy, helping while Rourke handled the business, Silas at his side. By late afternoon, the herd had been sold, and Rourke announced that the men could have the evening to themselves before starting the journey home at dawn. The others whooped with excitement at the prospect of saloons and card games, but Jasper felt only dread. As if sensing his distress, Rourke caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the hotel at the end of the street. An hour later, after the ranch hands had scattered, Jasper made his way to the hotel and climbed the stairs with his heart pounding. He found the room and knocked softly. The door opened to reveal both brothers already inside, and the relief that flooded through Jasper almost brought him to his knees. "Come in," Rourke said quietly. The room was modest but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the street. Silas was already pulling the curtains closed, shutting out the judgmental world beyond. "We have until dawn," Rourke said, and there was something both promising and bittersweet in his voice. They all knew this stolen time was precious exactly because it was so rare. Jasper crossed the room and let himself be pulled into their arms, let himself breathe in the familiar scent of leather and sage and something uniquely them. For long moments they simply held each other, three bodies finding perfect alignment as if they had been designed to fit together this way. The tension that had coiled in Jasper's shoulders since they entered town began to unwind, replaced by a different kind of awareness that made his skin feel too tight. "I miss this," he whispered against Rourke's shoulder. "Missed being able to touch you without fear." "We are here now," Silas murmured, his hands sliding up Jasper's back. "And tonight we do not have to hide." The promise in those words ignited something deep in Jasper's core, and when Rourke tilted his chin up for a kiss, Jasper surrendered completely. They undressed each other with reverent touches, mapping familiar territory and discovering new responses, and when they finally came together on the narrow bed, it was with a desperation born of too many days spent pretending indifference. Jasper lost himself in the overwhelming sensations, in the feeling of being caught between two sources of heat that threatened to consume him entirely, Rourke's mouth on his throat, and Silas's hands gripping his hips, and the exquisite torture of being touched everywhere at once, until he could not remember his own name. They moved together with increasing urgency, the bed creaking beneath them, and when release finally crashed over Jasper, it was with both their names torn from his lips like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin cooling in the night air, hearts gradually slowing. Jasper felt boneless and satisfied in a way that went beyond mere physical pleasure. This was what he had been missing his entire life, this sense of belonging, of being seen and wanted and cherished. "How do we keep doing this?" he asked into the quiet. "How do we go back to pretending tomorrow?" Rourke's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed. "We find a way. We have to. Because the alternative, living without this, is not something I am willing to accept." Silas shifted closer, his breath warm against Jasper's ear. "We have been careful for years, Rourke and I. We know how to read people, how to sense danger before it finds us. As long as we are smart about this, as long as we do not let our guard down in public, we can make it work." Jasper wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that love and caution could coexist indefinitely. But doubt whispered in the back of his mind, reminding him of all the stories he had heard about men like them, about the brutal justice meted out by those who could not tolerate anything that challenged their narrow view of the world. "What if we get caught?" he asked, voicing the fear that haunted his nightmares. "What if someone sees us, reports us?" "Then we run," Rourke said simply. "We take the horses and whatever supplies we can carry, and we disappear into the territories where no one knows our names or our history." Silas nodded against Jasper's shoulder. We have talked about this before, planned for it even. There are places in the mountains where homesteads sit days apart, where a man can live his life without interference as long as he does not cause trouble. We could build something there if we had to. The fact that they had already considered escape routes, already mapped out contingency plans, should have frightened Jasper. Instead, it reassured him, proved that they took the danger seriously and were prepared to protect what they had built together. "If it comes to that," he said quietly, "if we have to run, I want to go with you. Not as your employee or your hired hand, but as your equal partner in whatever life we build." "You already are our equal partner," Rourke said, voice fierce with conviction. "The ranch, the house, everything we have is as much yours as it is ours. If we ever put it to paper, if we ever make it legal, your name would be right there beside ours." Tears pricked at Jasper's eyes because no one had ever offered him that kind of security before. He had always been temporary, disposable, someone to be used and discarded when convenience dictated. But Rourke and Silas saw him differently, valued him not just for what he could provide, but for who he was as a person. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing me, for wanting me, for making me believe I deserve this." "You deserve everything," Silas said, and the certainty in his voice made Jasper's chest ache. "You deserve to be loved and protected and cherished, and we will spend every day proving that to you." They made love again as the night deepened, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss and whispered endearment. And when exhaustion finally claimed them, Jasper fell asleep, cradled between two warm bodies, feeling safer than he had in his entire life. The sound of roosters crowing woke them before dawn. Jasper surfaced slowly from dreams of open skies and freedom, reluctant to face the reality of another day spent hiding what they were to each other. But Rourke was already moving, extracting himself from the tangle of limbs and beginning to dress with practiced efficiency. "We need to be back before the hands wake," the older brother said quietly. "Cannot give them any reason to question where we spent the night." Jasper nodded and forced himself upright, though every muscle protested the movement. Silas helped him dress, fingers lingering over buttons and laces, stealing small touches that would have to sustain them through the long days ahead. When they were all presentable, Rourke checked the hallway before motioning them out. They descended the stairs one at a time, spacing themselves to avoid suspicion, and exited through different doors. To any observer, they were simply three men beginning their day, nothing connecting them except the employer and employee relationship that was their cover. The journey back to the ranch took 3 days of hard riding, and every mile felt like a weight pressing down on Jasper's chest. He missed the easy intimacy of the hotel room, the freedom to touch and be touched without fear. Out here surrounded by the other ranch hands, he had to maintain careful distance, had to ignore the longing looks Silas shot him when he thought no one was watching, and the protective way Rourke positioned himself between Jasper and potential danger. On the second night, after the camp had settled and the other men were snoring in their bedrolls, Jasper slipped away to check the horses. He was not surprised when Silas materialized from the shadows a few minutes later, or when the younger Bennett brother pressed him against a tree trunk and kissed him with barely contained hunger. "We should not," Jasper breathed, even as his hands fisted in Silas's shirt. "If anyone wakes, if they see us." "They will not," Silas promised, mouth moving to Jasper's throat. "I have been watching. They are all dead to the world." The risk made everything more intense, and when Silas's hand slid beneath Jasper's waistband, Jasper had to bite down on his own arm to keep from crying out. They brought each other to completion with desperate efficiency, and afterwards stood clinging to each other while their breathing steadied and reason slowly returned. "That was reckless," Jasper said, but he could not quite bring himself to sound disapproving. Silas grinned against his neck. "Worth it, though. Jasper had to agree. They returned to camp separately, and when Jasper finally crawled into his bedroll, he found Rourke's eyes on him through the darkness. The older brother said nothing, but the look conveyed both understanding and a warning to be more careful. Jasper nodded slightly, acknowledging the unspoken reprimand, and closed his eyes. The ranch appeared on the horizon late in the afternoon of the third day, the familiar silhouette of the barn and main house, making Jasper's heart lift despite his exhaustion. This was home now, the first place he had ever truly belonged, and he was fiercely grateful to be back. The hands dispersed to their various tasks, tending horses and unloading supplies and generally collapsing after the long journey. Jasper helped settle the animals before making his way to the main house, where Rourke and Silas were already reviewing ledgers and planning the next season's work. Without the prying eyes of the other men, Jasper allowed himself to relax fractionally, to meet Rourke's gaze without immediately looking away. "We need to talk," Rourke said, setting down his pen. "About what happened on the trail." Jasper's stomach clenched. He had known the conversation was coming, but that did not make it easier to face. Silas leaned against the desk, expression serious. "What we did was dangerous, not just to us, but to you. If we had been caught, you would have faced the worst consequences because you have no protection, no property or reputation to shield you." "I know," Jasper said quietly. "I am sorry. I should have been stronger." Silas shook his head. "That is not what I mean. You do not need to apologize for wanting connection, for needing reassurance. But we do need better boundaries when we are out in the world. The risk is too great." Rourke stood and crossed to where Jasper waited, pulling him into a careful embrace. "We are not angry with you. We just want to keep you safe, keep all of us safe so we can have a future together. From now on, when we are away from the ranch, we maintain complete professionalism. No stolen moments, no risky encounters. Can you do that?" Jasper nodded against Rourke's shoulder. "Yes, I can do that." Because he understood now that his desire for physical connection in the moment could jeopardize everything they were building together. Better to suffer through temporary loneliness than to lose them entirely. The months that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jasper threw himself into ranch work, proving his value again and again, until even the most skeptical hands had to admit he earned his keep. During the day, he was just another laborer, indistinguishable from the others, except perhaps for his relative youth. But at night, when the bunkhouse settled and the oil lamps were extinguished, Jasper would slip through the darkness to the main house, where Rourke and Silas waited. They were scrupulously careful about maintaining appearances, never showing favoritism in front of the other workers, never letting their guard down in public spaces. But behind closed doors, they built a life together that felt as real and substantial as any marriage, sharing meals and conversation, and the kind of deep intimacy that went far beyond physical pleasure. Jasper learned to read their moods and anticipate their needs the same way they learned his. He discovered that Rourke carried an old war injury that ached in cold weather, and began preparing willow bark tea on those nights without being asked. He found out that Silas had taught himself to read from his mother's Bible and hungered for new books, so Jasper started saving his wages to buy volumes from the general store in town. And they in turn learned the shape of Jasper's nightmares and the triggers that brought back bad memories, learned how to soothe him through dark moments and celebrate his victories. It was not perfect. There were arguments about money and responsibility, moments of jealousy when one of them felt excluded from a private moment between the other two, frustrations born of having to constantly hide their true relationship. But they worked through each conflict with honesty and compromise, and emerged stronger for having faced the difficulties together. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the barn and turned the world white and silent. Most of the ranch hands departed for warmer climates or town jobs, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain the property through the cold months. Jasper should have felt isolated by the reduced company, but instead he reveled in the increased privacy. With fewer people around, there was less need for pretense, less energy wasted on maintaining careful distance. He and the brothers fell into an easy domesticity that felt like a glimpse of what their future could hold if circumstances were different. They ate meals together around the big kitchen table, worked side by side, mending tack and repairing winter damage, spent long evenings by the fire simply existing in each other's company. It was during one of those quiet nights that Rourke brought up something he and Silas had clearly been discussing privately. "We have been thinking about the future," the older brother said, setting down the book he had been reading, "about what happens when we are too old to run the ranch ourselves." Jasper looked up from the saddle leather he was oiling. "What do you mean?" Silas shifted in his chair, firelight dancing across his features. "We mean that ranching is hard work, and eventually our bodies will give out. We need to plan for what comes after, need to make sure the three of us are protected no matter what happens." Rourke nodded. "We have been putting aside money, building a reserve that could see us through lean years or medical emergencies. But more than that, we need legal protection. We need documents that ensure if something happens to one of us, the others are taken care of." The implication made Jasper's throat tight. "You want to put my name on the deed?" "On the deed, on the bank accounts, on everything," Silas confirmed. "We want you to be a legal partner in this enterprise, not just a silent one, but we also know that doing so carries risk. If anyone looked too closely at the arrangement, if they started asking questions about why an unmarried ranch hand was being given equal ownership, they might draw uncomfortable conclusions," Jasper finished quietly. "Exactly," Rourke said. "So we need to be strategic about how we structure things. Make it look like a standard business partnership. 3 men pooling resources to make the ranch more profitable. Nothing unusual about that." Jasper considered the offer, weighing the security it represented against the increased vulnerability. If their relationship was ever discovered, having his name on legal documents would make him equally culpable, equally subject to whatever punishment society deemed appropriate. But it would also mean he truly belonged here, that his place in their lives was recognized, even if the nature of their bond had to remain hidden. "I want to do it," he said finally. "I want my name beside yours. Want to know that this place is as much mine as it is yours. Whatever risk comes with that, I am willing to take it." The brothers exchanged a look of relief and satisfaction. "Then we will make the arrangements next time we go to town," Rourke said. "Find a lawyer we can trust to draw up the papers without asking too many questions. It will cost a fair amount, but it is worth it for the peace of mind." They celebrated that night with a bottle of whiskey Rourke had been saving for a special occasion, toasting to their partnership and their future, and the family they had built against all odds. And when they finally made their way upstairs, Jasper found himself caught in an embrace that felt like a promise, like both brothers were trying to communicate through touch what words could never fully express. The spring thaw came gradually, melting the snow and turning the prairie into a sea of mud. The ranch hands began returning from their winter sojourns, ready for another season of hard work. Jasper welcomed them back with genuine warmth, comfortable now in his role, and secure in the knowledge that he had a place here that went beyond mere employment. The trip to town for the legal paperwork happened in early April, when the roads had dried enough to make travel feasible, but before the busy season fully began. Rourke, Silas, and Jasper rode together, maintaining their careful public distance, but united in purpose. The lawyer they found was an older man who had seen enough of frontier life to ask few questions. He drew up partnership papers that divided the ranch ownership 3 ways. structured the language to make it seem like a purely business arrangement between ambitious men. Jasper signed his name with a hand that shook slightly, aware that he was committing himself irrevocably to this path. When they rode back to the ranch with the papers safely stored in Rourke's saddlebag, Jasper felt like a different person than the frightened boy who had stumbled onto the Bennett property less than a year ago. That evening, as they sat together in the parlor reviewing the documents, a sharp knock sounded at the door. All three men froze, exchanging alarmed glances. It was late for visitors, and unexpected callers rarely brought good news. Rourke stood and moved to answer, hand resting casually near his hip, where he kept a revolver. Jasper's heart hammered as he heard voices in the entryway, one belonging to Rourke and another unfamiliar. Then Rourke returned with a stranger in tow, a rail-thin man with hard eyes and a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "This is Marshal Crane," Rourke said, voice carefully neutral. "He says he has questions about some missing cattle." The marshal swept his gaze across the room, lingering on Jasper and Silas before settling back on Rourke. "There have been reports of rustling in the area. Several ranches have lost stock over the past few months. I am visiting all the properties, seeing if anyone has information. Have you noticed anything unusual? Strange riders? Cattle with altered brands?" Rourke shook his head. "We keep close watch on our herd. Have not seen any evidence of tampering or theft." The marshal's eyes narrowed slightly. "And who are these two?" "My brother Silas," Rourke indicated, "and our business partner Jasper Cole." "Business partner," the marshal repeated, something speculative in his tone. "That is a generous title for someone so young." Jasper met the marshal's gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "I own a third of this ranch, sir. Have the papers to prove it if you would like to see them." The marshal waved a dismissive hand. "That will not be necessary. Just find it interesting. 3 unmarried men running a spread together. Not the usual arrangement. It works for us," Silas said coldly. "Is there something wrong with that?" "Not at all," the marshal said, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "Just making observations. I will leave you to your evening, but if you hear anything about the rustling, I expect you to report it immediately." He tipped his hat and showed himself out, leaving a wake of tension behind him. As soon as the door closed, Jasper sagged against the wall, adrenaline draining away. That was not about cattle. No, Rourke agreed grimly. That was someone testing the waters, seeing if there is anything here worth investigating further. "Who would send him?" Jasper asked. "Who even knows about us?" Silas paced the room like a caged animal. "Could be anyone. A disgruntled former employee, a jealous neighbor, someone who does not like how we run things. All it takes is one person with suspicions and a willingness to cause trouble. We need to be more careful," Rourke said. "No more late-night visits to the house until we are sure this has blown over. Jasper, you sleep in the bunkhouse for the next few weeks. Act like there is nothing unusual about our arrangement." Jasper wanted to protest, wanted to argue that running scared would only make them look guilty. But he understood the wisdom of caution, understood that their safety depended on maintaining appearances no matter how much it hurt. The weeks that followed were torture. Jasper lay in his bunk at night staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the empty space beside him, where Rourke or Silas should be. During the day he worked alongside the other hands, making sure to show no preference for the Bennett brothers, to treat them with the same respectful distance he showed everyone else. The marshal did not return, but the threat of his reappearance hung over them like a storm cloud. Jasper found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds, unable to fully relax even when he was alone. It was taking a toll on all of them, the forced separation and constant vigilance. Rourke grew short-tempered and snapped at minor infractions. Silas withdrew into himself, barely speaking except when necessary, and Jasper felt like he was slowly being hollowed out, like the best parts of himself were withering from lack of sunlight. It was unsustainable, and they all knew it. Something had to change, but none of them could see a path forward that did not involve either giving up what they had built or running away to start over somewhere. No one knew them. The decision was made for them on a Tuesday evening in late May. Jasper was in the barn tending to a horse with a thrown shoe when he heard boots on the wooden floor behind him. He turned, expecting one of the other hands, but instead found a man he had never seen before. Someone whose face was obscured by shadows, but whose intentions were clear from the knife he held. "Where are they?" the stranger demanded. "The Bennett brothers." Where are they hiding?" Jasper's mind raced. This was no random attack, no simple robbery. Someone had sent this man, someone who knew exactly what to look for. "I don't know what you mean," Jasper said, trying to keep his voice steady even as fear clawed at his throat. The man lunged forward, grabbing Jasper by the shirt and slamming him against the stall. "Do not lie to me, boy. I know what you are, what all three of you are. Disgusting perverts playing house and thinking no one would notice." Jasper tried to break free, but the man was stronger, and the knife pressed cold against his ribs. Before either of them could move further, a shot rang out loud enough to make Jasper's ears ring. The stranger jerked and fell, blood blooming across his shoulder. Jasper spun to see Rourke standing in the barn entrance with his revolver raised, Silas beside him looking equally grim. The attacker scrambled backward, clutching his wound. "You shot me," he gasped, voice thick with disbelief. "You will hang for this. For defending my property against an armed intruder," Rourke said coldly. "I do not think so, but you might want to leave before I decide you are still a threat." The man fled into the night, and Jasper sagged against the stall, legs suddenly too weak to support him. Rourke and Silas rushed to his side, hands running over him checking for injuries even though the knife had not broken skin. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Silas demanded. "I am fine," Jasper managed, "just shaken." "Who was he?" "Someone sent to scare us," Rourke said darkly, "or to gather evidence that could be used against us. Either way, this cannot continue. We cannot keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders, always afraid." "We need to leave," Silas said, and Jasper heard resignation in his voice. "Sell the ranch or just walk away, but we cannot stay here anymore. Not now that people know and are willing to act on their suspicions." Jasper wanted to argue, wanted to fight for the home they had built together, but he knew Silas was right. The attack tonight was just the beginning. If they stayed, if they tried to brazen it out, eventually someone would succeed in destroying them. "Where would we go?" he asked quietly. "West," Rourke said, "deep into the territories where homesteads are so far apart that neighbors never see each other. We file a claim, build a cabin, start over. It will be hard work, but at least we will be free. In this place, everything we have here, we sell what we can, take the rest with us," Silas said. "The cattle, the horses, our personal belongings. Leave the land and buildings for whoever wants to buy them. It will give us the stake we need to start fresh." They spent that night making plans, mapping out routes and calculating supplies and deciding what could be salvaged from the life they were abandoning. And when dawn broke, Jasper helped load wagons with their possessions, saying quiet goodbyes to the few hands who had been kind to him, committing to memory the view of the prairie from the barn door. The journey west took 6 weeks of hard travel through terrain that tested them in ways the ranch never had. They faced storms and river crossings and encounters with hostile travelers, but they faced it all together, united in their determination to build something new. And when they finally found a valley remote enough to offer safety, when they staked their claim and began the backbreaking work of raising a cabin, Jasper felt something settle in his chest that might have been peace. They built their home slowly, one log at a time, working from dawn until dusk and fallen into exhausted sleep, tangled together beneath the stars. There were no neighbors to judge them here, no prying eyes to demand explanations. They could simply be themselves, openly affectionate when they chose, private when they preferred. The first winter in their new home was brutal, but they survived it through careful preparation and stubborn will. And when spring came again, bringing green grass and wildflowers, Jasper stood on the porch of the cabin they had built and looked out across land that truly belonged to them. "This is it," Rourke said, coming to stand beside him with Silas on his other side. "This is what we fought for, freedom to love who we love without fear." Jasper leaned into their warmth, feeling blessed beyond measure. It had cost them everything to get here, every penny they owned and the life they had known. But standing here with the two men who had seen him when he thought he was invisible, who had loved him when he thought he was unlovable, Jasper knew it had been worth it. "Sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most precious destinations," he said quietly. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you were meant to have all along." They stood together watching the sun set over their valley, three men who had defied the world to claim their happiness. And whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them the same way they had faced everything else, together and unafraid. This was their home now, their sanctuary, the place where they could finally be themselves without apology or shame. The months that followed brought their own rhythms and revelations. They learned to work the land as a true unit, discovering that the division of labor came naturally when there was no need to maintain pretense. Rourke handled the heavy construction and animal husbandry, his strength and patience perfectly suited to the demanding physical work. Silas managed their supplies and did the hunting that kept them fed through lean times, his sharp eye and steady hand making him a natural provider. And Jasper found his calling in the garden plot behind the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil and preserving food for the winter months ahead. But more than the work, they learned to simply live together without fear. They could hold hands while walking to the stream. They could kiss in the doorway without checking first to see who might be watching. They could share a bed openly, falling asleep tangled together and waking to the sound of birdsong rather than the anxious awareness of needing to separate before anyone discovered them. It was a freedom Jasper had not even known to dream of. And some mornings, he woke convinced it was all an illusion that would shatter at the first touch of reality. But then, Rourke would pull him close, and Silas would bring coffee, and Jasper would remember that this was real, that they had built something beautiful and lasting in the wilderness. Occasionally, they saw other settlers passing through the valley, families heading further west, or trappers following the seasonal migration of game. They were cordial to these travelers, offering water and information about the trails ahead, but they never invited anyone to linger. Their privacy was too precious to risk, their happiness too hard-won to jeopardize through careless hospitality. Most people seemed content to accept them at face value, three bachelor brothers working a claim together. It was not an uncommon arrangement on the frontier, where men often banded together for survival and company. And if sometimes a traveler gave them a searching look or asked pointed questions about why none of them had wives, well, the answer was always the same. They were too busy building their homestead to worry about courting, too focused on survival to think about families. It was plausible enough that most people accepted it without further inquiry, though Jasper always felt relief when the visitors moved on and they could return to being themselves. As summer deepened into autumn, Jasper realized that he had stopped looking over his shoulder, stopped tensing at unexpected sounds. The constant vigilance that had defined his life at the ranch had gradually faded, replaced by a bone-deep sense of security. This was what peace felt like, he thought. This was what it meant to be truly home. On a crisp October evening, as they sat around the table finishing a meal of venison and root vegetables from Jasper's garden, Rourke cleared his throat in the way he did when he had something important to say. "I have been thinking about the future, about what happens as we get older. As this place becomes more established, we should make plans, put things in writing." Jasper felt a flutter of anxiety. "What kind of plans?" "Legal ones," Silas said, picking up the thread of conversation. "Out here we are beyond the reach of most law, but that also means we have no protection if something goes wrong. We need to document our wishes, make sure that if anything happens to one of us, the others know what to do." Rourke nodded. "I'm thinking about succession, about inheritance. If I die tomorrow, I want this land to go to both of you equally. Same if something happens to Silas or Jasper. We all contributed to building this place. We should all benefit from it." The thought of losing either of them made Jasper's chest tight with fear, but he understood the wisdom of preparation. They were living a hard life in an unforgiving environment, and accidents or illness could claim any of them without warning. "How do we do that without drawing attention?" he asked. Silas pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, unfolding it to reveal careful handwriting. "I have been drafting something. Just a simple declaration of partnership and mutual ownership. Nothing that would seem unusual for three men working a claim together, but specific enough that there could be no question about our intentions." Over the next hour, they refined the language, making sure it covered every contingency they could imagine while remaining neutral enough to avoid suspicion. When they were satisfied, all three signed their names at the bottom, and Rourke carefully folded the document and placed it in the small metal box where they kept their few valuable papers. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Now we have something official, even if no court would ever recognize it." "It is official enough for us," Jasper said, and meant it. The paper might not have legal standing, but it represented a commitment deeper than any marriage contract. They had chosen each other freely, built a life together against impossible odds, and now they were documenting that choice for posterity. That night they celebrated their unofficial commitment with a bottle of whiskey Silas had been hoarding, toasting to their partnership and their future, and the family they had created from nothing but determination and love. And when they made their way to the bedroom they shared, the lovemaking had a quality of renewal to it, as if they were reaffirming vows that needed no church or witnesses to make them binding. Winter came again, harsh and unrelenting, but they had prepared well, and their supplies held out. They spent the long, dark evenings telling stories and playing cards and simply enjoying each other's company, and Jasper thought he had never been happier. When spring finally broke and the snow began to melt, they emerged from the cabin to find their valley, transformed into a riot of wildflowers and new grass. The cattle they had brought west had survived the winter and would soon produce calves to expand their herd. The garden plot waited to be planted again. Everything was beginning anew, and Jasper felt that same sense of possibility and promise. As he stood in the doorway watching Rourke and Silas work together to repair winter damage to the barn, Jasper reflected on how far they had all come. A year ago they had been hiding in shadows, terrified of discovery, measuring out their affection in stolen moments. Now they stood openly in the sunlight, building a future that belonged entirely to them. It had cost them everything they had known, every certainty and security. But in exchange, they had gained something far more valuable. They had gained the freedom to love without shame, to build without fear, to simply exist as themselves. And that, Jasper thought as he went to join his partners in their work, was worth every mile they had traveled and every hardship they had endured. They were home, truly home, and nothing in this world could take that away from them. As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the valley warmed with promise, Jasper picked up a hammer and fell into the easy rhythm of working alongside the two men who had become his entire world. They had built this life together, log by log and choice by choice, and they would continue building it for as long as they drew breath. This was their story, their truth, their triumph over a world that would have denied them happiness, and it was enough. It was everything.